This is the story of a man who called himself BTK. He tormented a small town in Kansas called Wichita for 31 years. In one of his letters addressed to the police, he wrote, "I have a monster inside me. I don't know how it got into my head. I can't stop it." This story begins when a 15-year-old boy named Charlie Otero, who one evening in February 1974 in Wichita, USA, returns home after school. Charlie and his family have just moved to this area. He is eager to tell his parents what he did with his friends. But he notices something strange. The garage door is open and their dog Lucky is in the yard. They never leave Lucky outside unsupervised. He barks at people. Charlie opens the front door and hears his little brother Danny and his sister Carmen screaming. He wonders what's going on, so he rushes to his parents' bedroom and sees them. His father and mother were both dead. His father is on the floor and his mother is on the bed. Both of them have a plastic bag wrapped around their heads. In panic and rage, he wants to call the police, but the phone line is cut. So, he runs to the neighbors and tells them to call the police immediately. His parents have been murdered. The neighbors call, and officers Robert Bula and Jim Lindbergh quickly arrive. Charlie waits for them outside the house and tells them that his parents are inside. They are dead, but he is still waiting for another brother and another sister. They haven't come from school yet. The two policemen enter the house and find the parents in their bedroom, but they don't stop there. They go to the room of the little Joseph, 9 years old, and they find him, his head wrapped in a plastic bag. And in the basement, they discover Josephine, 13 years old, laying on the floor. Poor Charlie. He didn't know that his little brother and sister were already dead, too. For the Wichita police, this is a huge case. It's usually quiet around here, and it starts badly. A whole bunch of neighbors claim they saw the killer. Some describe a tall, skinny white man, and others a short black man. With that, try to make a composite sketch. It's 1974, so forget about DNA. Forensic science finds semen stain on one of the victim's clothes and blood stain at the crime scene that later reveals the killer's blood type. He is blood type O, which is quite common in the area. Apart from that, no leads at all, so Wichitan starts adding more locks to their doors and alarms. And they are right, because it's a serial killer who has struck, and for now, the police know nothing about him. Six months later, in October 1974, Don Granger, a journalist from the Wichita Eagle, one of the most read newspapers in the Midwest, hears that there is new information in the investigation. 3 prisoners may have information about the Otero case and are looking to negotiate with the police. Granger is confident in his information, so he publishes it in his newspaper. And a few days later, his phone rings. It's a harsh and sharp voice with a local accent. A man tells him to listen carefully. He informs the journalist that there is a letter about the Otero case in a book at the public library, specifying which book contains the letter, and then hangs up. Granger immediately notifies the police, and an officer finds the letter at the specified location. What a letter. It starts with, "I'm writing you to save the taxpayer the costs of a long and unnecessary investigation. Your 3 prisoners are just looking for cheap publicity at the Otero's expense. I am the one who did it, and I did it alone." To make sure he is believed, he provides details that only the police would know. For instance, how he tied up the Otero parents. And this letter ends with a chilling sentence. "I'm sorry. I have a monster inside me, and I don't know how it got into my head. I can't stop it. Maybe you can? And he has already chosen his next victim." At the bottom of the letter, he signed it with BTK, and he explains that's his modus operandi. B for bind, T for torture, and K for kill. At first, the police managed to persuade the Eagle newspaper not to publish anything about this BTK. The letter should remain confidential. But the rival newspaper, the Wichita Sun, learns about BTK's existence and releases the story without warning. What the press doesn't know yet is that BTK is suspected of another murder committed a few months after the Otero family massacre. Catherine Bright was stabbed in her home after hiding for hours in her closet. BTK has already claimed 5 lives, and it's just the beginning. When you trace back this story, it might seem strange, but for 3 years, BTK kills no one. He doesn't contact the police. 3 years of silence, and then a sudden return. On March 17, 1977, at 1 in the afternoon, still in Wichita, Officer Fletcher receives a call. Go immediately to 1311 South Hydraulic Street. Someone has reported a homicide. And when he arrives, the officer is greeted by a neighbor because the 2 sons of his neighbor came banging on his door. They say they were locked in the bathroom by a man and they escaped by breaking the window. But that's not all. The neighbor leads Officer Fletcher to the Ralford family's house, where Shirley, 26 years old, and her 3 children lived. The mother is lying in the living room, her arms tied, and a plastic bag wrapped around her head at the neck. One of the daughters is sitting next to the body, crying. Officer Fletcher tries everything he can. He unties the knot on the plastic bag and attempts CPR, but it's too late. And it's Fletcher who shouts out loud when reinforcement arrive to be careful with the knots. It looks a lot like BTK's work. It looks like it, but is it for certain? That's the whole purpose of the investigation that begins. It's Richard Lamunian, the new police chief, who has to answer the question. At first, he immediately spots the differences between the 2 cases. First of all, here the children survived. The little girl wasn't SA, and the phone wasn't cut off. The phone! The phone! Richard Lamunian suddenly wants to check something that bothers him. He rushes to see the children and asks them if the phone hadn't rung when they were locked in the bathroom. The children tell him that it had. It rang several times. Could it be that the ringing phone scared the killer? And that's why he spared the children. So if that's the case, it might be BTK. And there's something else. 2 girls from the neighborhood say they saw the man, and they had seen him before, lurking around their neighbor's apartment. And that might mean that he targeted the Ralford family, even though it wasn't his initial plan. So, no more doubt, it's BTK. The knots are exactly the same, just like the plastic bag. The differences are due to the killer's haste. He rushed. He didn't take the time to cut the phone. The ringing scared him. He fled. But it's him. It's BTK. But once again, he got away. It seems he lurks around isolated houses in the suburbs of Wichita, looking for his next target. And when he finds it, he's capable of observing it for months, until the day he sneaks into the house. That's what happens on December 8, 1977. He sneaks into Nancy Fox's house. He hides in her closet and waits for her to come home. When she does, she opens the closet, and he lunges at her with a revolver. The next day, after executing his plan to the end, he's so confident in himself, he feels so powerful that he calls the police from a phone booth. You'll find a homicide at 843 South Pershing. He didn't say more. The police locate the booth and rush to the scene. He's no longer there. And from that moment on, the Wichita police receive reinforcements from FBI specialists, guys who know about serial killers. And about this reckless and flamboyant phone call, here's what they say. It's his way of asserting his control over the situation. He has perfect confidence in himself and believes the police aren't clever enough to catch him. To the young police chief, he's treating them like fools. Two months after the murder of Nancy Fox, on February 10th, 1978, a package arrives in the mailbox of a local Wichita TV station, Cake TV. And when the receptionist opens the package, he finds a letter and a poem signed BTK. Next to his name, the killer has drawn several slipknots. He complains that he's not talked about enough and wonders how many people he has to kill for the national newspapers to mention him. What frustrates him is that the press isn't aware of his existence and doesn't give him a name like BTK the Strangler, the Psycho, the Wichita Executioner. He talks about the 7 murders he has committed. He gives a disturbing amount of details and draws pictures of his victims. This guy is completely insane. As a result, the FBI and the Wichita police implement a new strategy. They want to establish communication with BTK. He's a narcissist, he'll like that, and the goal is to make him slip up. But it's a dangerous game. It's putting him at the center of attention. He might feel more powerful than ever. And then, the residents need to be warned of the looming danger. Because until now, people think the crimes are isolated acts. They know nothing about BTK. The truth needs to be unveiled, even if it strokes the ego of the other madman. The police chief, Richard Lemunion, released the news in a TV interview. And confirms to the public that there is indeed a serial killer in Wichita and that they must take all measures to protect themselves. And during the interview, with the complicity of the hosting channel, Lemunion broadcasts 2 subliminal images, 2 hidden images that are supposed to strike BTK's brain. On one of them, you can read, "Call the police chief now." But it doesn't work. However, panic grips the city. Gun sales skyrocket. And the consequence of all this, which the police had absolutely not anticipated, is that BTK disappears from the scene for 6 years. But the investigation continues. The police set up a special task force, a group that works only on BTK. At its head, Lieutenant Ken Landwehr. The idea is that since BTK has a local accent and he always strikes in Wichita, he's from there. He's not far away. He's from the Midwest and maybe even from Wichita itself. The police noticed that BTK types his letters on a typewriter, but he never sends the original. He sends poor quality photocopies so that police can't identify the typewriter brand and the photocopier. Photocopiers weren't common in the 70s. The police managed to determine that BTK used one of the photocopy machines at Wichita University campus. Unfortunately, these are the most used photocopiers in the city, so it's a dead end, but at least it confirms he's local. What remains most disturbing in this investigation are his breaks between crimes. This way of appearing and disappearing for long periods. After 6 years of silence, BTK committed a new murder in April 1985. A 53-year-old single woman, Maureen H., was tied up, tortured, and killed. Then he disappears again for 6 years, before striking again in 1991, killing Dolores Davis, whose body he dumped under a bridge. And then he takes another break. In the meantime, he became an urban legend. It's a story that parents tell their children to scare them. But now, we have his DNA. Yes, science has made progress. The semen stains found on some of his victims revealed his genetic identity. For now, it serves no purpose. But if we catch him, it will immediately confirm his identity. Unless he is dead. It's 2004. His first murder was in 1974, his last in 1991, 13 years ago. To mark the 30th anniversary, the Eagle newspaper publishes a major report. Even if those who lived through these horrors haven't forgotten BTK, today an entire new generation of Wichitans has never even heard of him. And that's just fine. It's this article that will wake BTK up. Someone who's always been there in the shadows, attentive. After 13 years of silence, the Eagle receives a letter straight from a distant past. It's signed BTK. When the Eagle journalists receive the letter, they are skeptical. It's been over 13 years since he disappeared. Maybe it's not him. Inside the envelope, he slipped in a photo. It's a picture showing 3 women lying on the ground. 2 of them are BTK's latest victims. The third is the victim of an unresolved case in 1986. The letter accompanying the photo is signed Bill Thomas Kilman, the initials BTK. But it's the first time he's signed his letters like this. Editor-in-Chief Tim Potter notices a detail, the way he writes the letter B. It's exactly the same as in his letters from 10 years ago. Seen from the side, it has always reminded him of a pair of breasts. The journalists send the letter to the police, and it lands on Lieutenant Ken Landwehr's desk. It's been 13 years since he last heard from BTK. Can you imagine 13 years? The moment he lays eyes on this letter, he knows it's him, and he thinks he's ready to kill again. So, the small task force set up 13 years ago immediately springs into action. And Ken Landwehr reverts to the old strategy. He wants to lure him out. For that, he wants to step forward, address him publicly. He wants to flatter him so he'll respond. But stepping into the limelight carries some risks. The FBI warns Landwehr. BTK will become obsessed with you, he might target your family. But for Landwehr, this is their last chance. Ken Landwehr immediately calls a press conference, and he reveals the existence of this new letter and the threats that accompany it. During the press conference, he isn't really speaking to the journalists. He's speaking to him, to BTK. He says this is one of the most challenging cases of his career, probably the hardest. He mentions that he would be flattered to talk to the person who did all this. And it works. BTK makes contact. He sends other messages, notably in cereal boxes engraved with his initials that he leaves here and there. The exchange of messages lasts for months. BTK seems to enjoy the attention, and he just announced that he has spotted his next victim. But he will make a mistake. His first mistake. He leaves one of his packages, one of his cereal boxes that serves as his mailbox, in a covered parking lot equipped with surveillance cameras. And on the footage, his face is not visible, but his car is. It's a black Jeep Cherokee. After that, he makes another mistake, a decisive one. In one of his letters to the police, he asks whether a floppy disk can be traced or not. He asks the police to tell him the truth. He trusts them. This is the moment that Ken Landwehr has been waiting for. He takes a gamble. Of course, he can identify the origin of a floppy disk by using its metadata. But he tells BTK that it's not possible, that he doesn't need to worry. And BTK sends him a floppy disk. By analyzing the metadata on the floppy disk, the police find information about the computer's owner. The disk comes from the Christ Lutheran Church, a congregation located north of Wichita. Even better, they have a first name. The person who registered the disk is named Denis. So, BTK is Dennis Rader? It took 31 years of investigation to get here. Ken Landwehr sends one of his men to check the model of Dennis Rader's car. It's a black Jeep Cherokee. In his files, there's DNA from Rader's daughter. They compare it with BTK's DNA. It's a match. He's sure now. He has identified BTK. All that's left is to arrest him. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader, alias BTK, returns home driving his Cherokee. Lieutenant Ken Landwehr approaches him with a gun pointed at his car door and yells at him to step out of the car. A man emerges, a small man half-bald with a beard. Landwehr handcuffs him. BTK is finally apprehended. Dennis Rader confesses only 4 months later. Everything, all the murders in detail, and it doesn't seem to affect him. Wearing accountant-like glasses, a small goatee, and thinning hair, he details all the horrors committed over the past 30 years. Without expressing any emotion, in a perfectly monotonous voice. He is married, father of 2 children, he is the president of his church, and his profession, you won't believe it. He was hired by a security company to monitor homes in Wichita. He profited from the terror he himself created. Judged in 2005 for the 10 murders he committed, BTK avoids the death penalty. These crimes occurred before 1994, and at that time, Kansas had abolished the death penalty. He is thus sentenced 10 times to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. If you enjoyed our deep dives into the world of true crime, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe.